El Club Bilderberg, el Cabal, la élite oscura, el culto a Saturno o los Illuminati. Diferentes formas a llamar a aquella entidad malévola que se oculta en las sombras y controla el mundo. A lo largo del tiempo han ridiculizado y humillado a aquellos que han hablado sobre la existencia de esta asociación corrupta y malvada. Hasta que con el paso del tiempo muchas de las cosas que se decían sobre ellos y sobre el futuro del mundo se han ido comprobando, poco a poco. No hace falta decir que hace 30 años, sino incluso hace 20 años, el tan solo decir que había una enorme red de tráfico de menores dirigida por gente sumamente poderosa era una completa ridiculez para algunos. Y ni qué hablar de hace 50 años, en donde tan solo insinuar que un sacerdote podría ser un pedófilo violador de niños haría que te acusaran de blasfemo e incluso que te llevaras una paliza. Hoy seguro que es muy diferente todo, aunque no tanto, ya que hasta ahora cuando alguien habla acerca de una teoría conspirativa se le sigue tomando como loco. Y esto fue lo que pasó hace 11 años con Bill Ryan, un hombre que evidenció a la élite oscura y nadie lo escuchó. Lo tomaron como un loco e incluso dio indicios sobre lo que pasa hoy en día con la actual enfermedad y sobre cosas peores que vendrán después. Hoy hablaremos sobre la Misión Anglosajona. La zona de Mystery. Bill Ryan, un periodista e investigador de las sectas secretas, compartió una transcripción junto a un video el 16 de febrero de 2010, con la intención de difundir el testimonio que obtuvo de una entrevista con un importante testigo, el cual, después de ser parte del ejército británico, pasó a trabajar con personas muy influyentes y poderosas en la ciudad de Londres. Entre estas personas se encontraban masones de altos grados. Es necesario aclarar que la ciudad de Londres es importante, ya que es conocido que en este lugar es uno donde más reuniones masónicas se pueden dar. Podríamos decir que es uno de los puntos favoritos de reunión para esta logia. Continuando con la historia de este personaje, él comenta que continuó así por un tiempo, hasta que en junio del 2005 asistió a una reunión, la cual creyó que sería como las otras, en las que se discutía más que nada sobre temas financieros, pero esta sería diferente, ya que cuando llegó era un grupo bastante grande, entre 25 y 30 personas, de las cuales se podía saber que todos eran masones, y solamente de altos grados. Entre ellos había políticos muy reconocidos del Reino Unido. También se encontraban personajes como el jefe de la policía de Londres, representantes de la iglesia y representantes de la milicia. Y a diferencia de las otras reuniones que solían ser con menos gente y de una manera más formal, esta no era así. Todos se sentaron y comenzaron a hablar sobre cómo iba un plan, el cual parece ya habían hecho hace mucho tiempo, pero discutían sobre si era un buen momento para ejecutarlo y acerca de que había problemas para poder hacerlo. Bill Ryan comenta que este personaje le fue explicando que para repasar cómo lograr ejecutar este plan con certeza y sin errores, estas personas en la reunión fueron analizándolo paso por paso. Para una mejor explicación sobre este maquiavélico y oscuro plan, te presentaré una serie de fragmentos del video compartido por el mismo Bill Ryan, relatando esta entrevista.
The first thing that he heard was they were talking about the fact that Israel didn't look as if it was getting prepared to attack Iran anytime soon. This was a problem. Even back in June 2005, they were apparently concerned that what it was that was planned on some kind of a timeline wasn't rolling out according to schedule, and this was an issue for them. So that attracted his attention very quickly, because he'd never been in a meeting when this kind of thing was discussed. Then they were talking about China and how powerful China was getting, both militarily and financially, very quickly, and that the Japanese weren't doing what they were supposed to do, which was to interfere in some way with the Chinese financial system. They weren't doing that, and this was another problem because China was getting too strong too quickly. Other things that were discussed were, for example, the coming financial crash, the centralization of resources, everything that we saw starting to happen in October 2008. They were planning that and referring to it in their meeting in June 2005. So there was clearly a rollout of some plan here, and he was quite shocked the more that he heard, and when he really realized what was happening, he was extremely shocked.
Como podemos ver, estas personas no hablaban de cualquier cosa. Como la mayoría puede saber hoy en día, China ha continuado creciendo a niveles apresurados, haciendo competencia a las grandes potencias del mundo, y cada vez abarcando mucho más terreno, sobre todo con la actual situación que atraviesa el mundo. Estos individuos hablaban realmente sobre un plan, que se ejecutaría poco después. La fecha en la que se nos dice fue esta reunión es en el 2005. Un año después, en 2006, fue el colapso de la burbuja inmobiliaria en los Estados Unidos, la cual provocó en octubre de 2007 la llamada crisis de las hipotecas subprime, y a causa de esto fue que se dio la crisis del 2008, la cual comenzó en Estados Unidos y ese mismo año se esparció a nivel internacional. El hecho de que hubiera una gran crisis que comenzó poco después de esta reunión ya es alarmante, y si creen que es una coincidencia o que esto se podría deducir con análisis de la bolsa y que no es nada sorprendente, continuemos viendo la entrevista.
And the plan is to provoke Iran or China to retaliate. And our guy, our source, who is a military man, is privately as convinced as he can be, although this has never been made public and this is not publicly known, that Iran does have nuclear weapons. He believes that they have been provided by China behind the scenes. And all of this is intended because it's all right with these controlling forces that Iran has nuclear weapons, because they want them to be used. The plan is for either Iran or for China to retaliate after Iran is struck with a nuclear weapon. At that point, there will be a limited nuclear exchange in the Middle East, followed by a ceasefire.
Tal como se explica, uno de los pasos es que Israel ataca a Irán. Somos conscientes de que estos dos han estado en guerra por mucho tiempo, y ha habido muchos ataques, pero hasta ahora no han usado armas nucleares, y según lo dicho, la intención es que el público no se entere sobre que Irán las tiene, ya que no se quiere ningún antecedente para cuando sean usadas por ellos, porque como dije, estos dos han estado en guerra por mucho tiempo, y siguen estándolo. Podría ser solo cuestión de tiempo para que en algún momento llegara a suceder, aunque esto sería devastador por todas las consecuencias que traería.
He heard this being planned in this meeting. This is being choreographed. It's like the script for a movie. This is exactly what's intended to happen. And during this time, the other thing that's being set up for this, and many people watching this will be aware that this is being set up in the background. We've had a lot of information about this from a number of good researchers from many countries who are reporting this on the internet, that things are being set up in many of the Western countries for there to be heavy controls over populations, martial law, increased powers on security forces who are not just the army or the police, but in Britain, for example, our source said that he absolutely knew personally for a fact, that a very large number of private security people, their powers were being increased to give them the ability to arrest people, the ability to detain, the ability to handle riots in streets. And here we're talking about just regular people working in private security, people who give the parking tickets on the streets. Their powers are being increased in the same way. And last year we heard President Obama talking about how he wanted to have a sort of national guard at home in America ready to handle this kind of thing. There are a lot of indicators that this is being set up. And in this rollout of this crazy scenario where it is intended that there will be a limited nuclear exchange in the Middle East, the idea is that as the world looks upon this with horror, then they will demand from their governments that there are heavy controls over travel, over communication, over people who meet, over people who protest in the streets. They want to make sure that they don't have crazy bombers on aeroplanes, crazy bombers in the shopping malls. They want to make sure, and because people will be driven into fear by this, they'll request and demand and insist on heavy controls from their governments, which will be justified. And this is where you're going to kind of get the martial law situation in all the Western countries. It's intended as a justification. All of this is just the start of something, because this story gets much bigger, and it's pretty horrifying. And if watching this now you're feeling a little bit shocked, this is how I was feeling when I heard this information.
Sabemos que hoy en día el exceso de fuerza policial y militar ha aumentado. Cada vez es más en muchos países donde estos servicios, que deben ser públicos, terminan humillando y pisoteando los derechos de las personas, incluso matándolas, en caso de no respetar un decreto gubernamental, o por exigir una mejor vida en sus países. Y sabemos que el plan es que todo esto suceda, porque sea la misma población quienes lo pidan, ya que en caso de haber un incidente terrorista, muchas personas van a querer sentirse protegidas, y exigirán esto, aunque eso signifique darle más poder al policía, o incluso una ley marcial. Todo esto sería por miedo. A la gente le controla el miedo. La gente no piensa con miedo. La gente es dócil con miedo. La gente es frágil con miedo. Con miedo, la gente se puede controlar. Si se tiene miedo, esta es la clave para dominar el mundo. Si la gente tiene miedo, se acabó. Vivimos una pandemia y la gente tiene miedo de salir. Y bueno, seamos sinceros, si el gobierno dice que se va a volver comunista, ¿cuántas personas se quedarían en sus casas sin hacer nada solo por miedo a enfermarse? Y esto es algo natural. Nadie quiere morir, nadie quiere que un familiar se infecte o le pase algo, pero esto es miedo. El miedo provoca duda, y la duda hace que las personas no puedan actuar. Haz que el matemático más inteligente del mundo le pique la duda y no resolverá la más sencilla ecuación.
During the time of this ceasefire, everyone's shocked, everyone's frightened, everyone's really terrified about where this is going to go. There are all kinds of heavy controls over populations everywhere. And then the next thing that happens in this chess game that's being played is that biological weapons are released on China. You heard this being discussed in this meeting. They will release a flu-like virus that will be genetically targeted against the Chinese population. It's racially targeted against the Chinese people. It's designed to spread like wildfire and to knock out a large number of the Chinese people. And these people in this meeting were laughing about this. They said, China will catch a cold. Those were their words. China will catch a cold. And they were laughing about the fact that these biological weapons will wreak havoc among the Chinese population. And after that, then what effectively will be a kind of plague will actually spread right across the world to the West as well. Our source was not clear whether this was a Chinese retaliation or whether the thing would just spread out of control in the way that it would be very understandable if it did, whether it's racially targeted or not. These things actually mutate. So now you've got a situation where there's been a limited nuclear war in the Middle East. there's a pandemic that really is sweeping across the world and really is killing people very visibly. And you've got this totalitarian military lockdown in all the governments in the Western world because everyone's going to be in panic about all of this. And then, he said, then the real war starts. Something that would be justifiably called the Third World War with a much more major nuclear exchange.
China pescará un resfriado. Palabras demasiado oscuras y obscenas si las revisamos hoy en día, ¿no creen? Esta gente maldita sabía algo, estaba haciendo algo. Ellos planeaban una enfermedad contra China y que luego esa enfermedad se expandiera por todo el mundo. Y estas personas se reían de eso mientras lo decían. En caso de ser verdad, todo lo que este hombre le contó a Bill Ryan es definitivamente gente infinitamente cruel y desalmada, porque significaría que realmente todo lo que está pasando fue planeado y hecho con toda la intención de matar gente, y en ese caso sería horrible. En caso de que no, ¿cómo podría saber este sujeto que justamente pasaría algo así con China y luego saltaría al mundo entero? Esa probabilidad es mínima. Aquí es donde todos debemos comenzar a preguntarnos, no si esto es una casualidad, sino cómo puede ser que haya pasado. Hasta ahora no ha sucedido algo como una tercera guerra mundial, tal como menciona que pasaría después de la pandemia, aunque debemos aclarar que la pandemia no ha terminado aún, y en caso de que lo hiciera y no hubiera pasado, ¿qué significaría? Sinceramente, a mi criterio personal, una tercera guerra mundial es algo que veo poco posible. No creo que pase, al menos no en años cercanos. La probabilidad no es cero, ya que no olvidemos cómo fue el inicio del 2020, en donde vimos conflictos suficientemente fuertes para pensar en una guerra. Quizás también, nunca mejor dicho, sea una bomba de tiempo.
And at this point, I asked him, is this just about population reduction? What is this about? Why are they doing this? Why this insane Dr. Strangelove plan for just unleashing all of this stuff on the world? Why do it? Now, as our conversation went on, I started to find answers to those questions. Now, some of this is speculation. I want to share this speculation with you because it's important enough that we work together here to figure out what's going on. And there are some clues, there's some very important clues that I'm going to present to you here in this video. He said absolutely it's about population reduction. So I said, well, in this meeting, did they mention any figures? And he said, yes, they did, 50%. Half the world's population. This is planned as per the Georgia Guidestones. For those of you who don't know what the Georgia Guidestones are, it's a stone monument in Georgia in America that was erected anonymously a number of years ago. It's in 8 languages and it's like an Illuminati manifesto for a new world, as it were. And just hold that thought about this being a manifesto for a new world. This is an important concept here in what I'm presenting. One of the key parts of this manifesto for this new world is that there should be a population of 500 million people. Now, 500 million people is an enormous reduction from the nearly 7 billion that we've got at the moment. That's pretty much 95% of people who would no longer be on this planet. And 50% is a step towards that. And there's a reason why they're doing all of this. There's a reason why they're in a hurry. There's a reason for this insanity. And when he was explaining this, then he said that they have a name for this plan. This project has got a name. And I said, well, what is this name? He said it is called the Anglo-Saxon Mission. The Anglo-Saxon Mission.
La Misión Anglosajona. La misión de reducir finalmente la población. No han sido pocas las veces que se ha cuestionado y se ha dicho que existe un plan para reducir la población, incluso muchas veces supuestamente justificado por la ciencia como algo que debe pasar para evitar nuestra extinción, o por la falta de recursos que habrá en un futuro próximo. ¿Y saben qué es curioso? Las enfermedades, sí. Las enfermedades y las pandemias siempre desde la peste negra se han estudiado como algo que pasa cada cierto tiempo para limpiar el mundo y continuar con la sobrevivencia del más fuerte. Pero, ¿qué pasa cuando estas enfermedades y todas esas muertes son provocadas? Y no por una situación natural de una enfermedad que no se puede evitar. Pues es hora de poner eso en duda. ¿Esta pandemia y todas estas muertes acaso se podría haber evitado?
Now, I'd heard that before. It was something historical, I think, to do with the Crusades quite a long time ago. But I hadn't heard it in the present day context, and neither had he. And later on, as he continued to tell his story, I began to understand what I thought this might be about. Hence the title of this video, and the reason why I want to share this information with you, because we need to work together to figure out what's going on here. It's extremely important to understand. There's a plan, I believe, that Hitler would be proud of, which is so evil, it's so Machiavellian, it's so hard to face up to, it's so unbelievable, that I need to put it on the table for you so that you can consider whether or not this might be a possibility. The plans that I've been describing are definitely a possibility because he heard them with his own ears in this meeting. Everything I've described up until now, up to and including a major outbreak of hostilities after the limited war. So the sequence is as follows. The planned sequence is as follows. Israel attacks Iran, then there's a ceasefire, then during which time there is heavy governmental military controls over populations in all Western countries. Then China is attacked by a biological weapon. It's a flu-like disease that spreads like wildfire. This goes all over the world, and then they have a major Third World War. And then, by this time, 50% of the population will be destroyed. And not only because of the war or the plague, but because, as many of you watching this will understand, the infrastructure goes down in situations like this. There's no food in the supermarkets, there's no gas in the pumps, the telecommunication goes down, there may not even be water coming out of the taps. People are kind of thrown back into a Victorian era without the facilities to handle this, because most people don't have their vegetable gardens, they don't have their horse and cart, they're not able to survive in the way that we used to be able to. We're very, very vulnerable in our technological advancement. We're extremely vulnerable, and of course the controllers know this. At this stage, our source was speculating about why are they in a hurry? Why do they want to do this?
Una nueva época victoriana. ¿Se podrían imaginar algo así hoy en día? No lo creo. No es una mentira que hoy somos sumamente dependientes de la electricidad y de todo lo que obtenemos gracias a eso, televisión e internet. Pero, ¿qué hay de los hospitales y los equipos médicos que necesitan luz? ¿O qué pasaría ahora que cada vez que la gente se deshace más del dinero en efectivo y usa más tarjetas de débito o de crédito? ¿Qué pasa si la estructura que hoy en día existe desaparece? Y simplemente no hay más dinero digital. Y como no hay servicios ni red, no se le puede entregar el dinero en efectivo a nadie, porque sus cuentas del banco desaparecieron. Hay que agregar cuántos sistemas hoy en día funcionan con energía eléctrica o con internet, como una gran cantidad de coches o de purificadores de agua. Sin agua había muchas enfermedades, y no digo que deje de haber agua porque no haya luz, sino porque si hay una guerra y al mismo tiempo existe aún casos de una enfermedad que previamente logró desatar una pandemia, lo primero en agotarse será el agua, seguido por las medicinas y la comida. Ha habido guerras antes, pero hay algo que aunque nos perturbe y nos pueda doler en el fondo es una realidad, Y es que la gente de hace más de 80 años no era tan dependiente, mucho menos del internet, ni de todos los lujos que tenemos hoy.
And there's a sort of heavy irony here, which is like I was saying, well, if you're going to plan the Third World War, then why not take your time over it and get it right and do a really good job? You can, this could be in 20 years' time or 30 years' time, it doesn't really matter. Why is there in such a rush? And our source said that he felt, from inside information he's continued to receive, that this is still timed for something around 18 months from now. And that puts it around about the middle of 2011. He doesn't know this for sure because these events aren't calendar driven, they're actually event sequence driven. In other words, this has got to happen before that happens, and then after that the next thing can happen, then after that the next thing can happen. So a whole lot of things have got to be in place before all the dominoes fall over, so to speak. And they seem to be behind schedule in some of this. There are some planned events that definitely haven't happened. One of the things which I remembered when I was hearing this story was that our source, Henry Deacon, and many of you who've watched Project Camelot videos and read their reports for the last 3 years will know that when we met Henry Deacon in 2006, he said that in his own inside information was that there would be a war against China in 2008. Now that didn't happen. And all this time, at that time it didn't make any sense, and even now it didn't make any sense. It's like, well, all right, but why do this? Why do this? Why do this? Now, this was his answer. And our source is a pretty smart guy. He's been in the military. It's a totally different story that he didn't debrief in our audio transcript, which you have the opportunity to read, but he's had his own ET experiences in the military. He's got his own sources of information about some of the background for this. He says that he's as sure as he can be that the people who are calling the shots in the world, you can call them the Illuminati, the controllers, the cabal, whatever name you have for them, they believe that there is going to be what he called a geophysical event, a major geophysical event. He says that the best information that he's got is that the insiders believe that this is going to happen, or they are concerned that this is going to happen. And many of you watching this will know that this isn't a completely crazy idea. There have been trillions of dollars that have been spent on deep underground bases for some reason which we don't know why it is. You'll know about the seed bank in Svalbard. This is in the public domain, where all the seeds of all the plants and all the crops in the world have been buried deep inside a granite vault in northern Norway. There are many precautions being taken as if something might happen that could really threaten some of these valuable resources, including the seed banks of the world. Now, if there is going to be a geophysical event as they believe, this is because it seems to be preserved Illuminati inside knowledge, whether it's true or not, that there are repeated cyclical geophysical events about every 11,500 years. Information about what really happened to Atlantis was very probably in the Great Library of Alexandria that burnt down a couple of thousand years ago. There are persistent rumours that much of that information has been retrieved and it's in the Vatican Library. This is information which is not in the public domain and which the insiders may have access to. Whether it's accurate or not, the important thing is to realize that they probably believe that this will happen and they're making their precautions. And this might be the justification for this insanity that we've just heard about in this plan. Consider this. He said, if there's going to be a major geophysical event, something like a pulse shift, maybe it's Planet X, maybe it's some kind of energetic phenomenon that the solar system is going to be moving into, that's going to somehow destabilize the Earth or the Earth's crust in some way. We don't know. But if there were to be a major emergency like that, something that would actually make a war look very inconsequential, the thing that will help the human race to survive it, or will help parts of the human race to survive it, is if there is already emergency preparedness in place before it happens. In other words, if you knew that there was an emergency coming, if you knew, for instance, that there's a hurricane coming in to hit your city, then you put all the emergency preparedness in place beforehand. You have the troops ready, you have the infrastructure ready, you have the military ready, you have everything that you need ready to handle this situation so you can respond and react and recover in the best possible way. Our source suggests that the reason for this whole Third World War scenario is that then the Western governments, with the Chinese out of the way, will be in a state of such totalitarian control of their own population that they will be best equipped to recover and rebuild the new world after a cataclysm. And he thinks that this is what's happening. And I have to tell you that this terrible logic makes sense to me, that they would think that way. I'm not for a moment agreeing that this will happen. I think this is wild, crazy stuff, but if they believe that it's going to happen, then this could be their justification for this kind of plan that we've heard about is really being discussed. And this now is my own speculation right now, which also makes sense to me. And I invite your comments and your thoughts about this. We need to work together to figure out what's happening here. It's called the Anglo-Saxon mission. What that told me was that the reason for the name is because this is a white racist agenda for the inheriting of the new earth. It's a plan that Hitler would be proud of. If they think that a new earth needs to be rebuilt, a new world, think of that little phrase there. If a new world needs to be rebuilt after a cataclysm, they want the Anglo-Saxons to be doing it. They don't want the Chinese to be doing it. They get the Chinese out of the way first, and then the Anglo-Saxons will inherit this new world with the other nations, the Asian nations, the African nations, the South American nations. Presumably, it is assumed that they won't have the resources to be able to handle the situation in any kind of a way that gives them the strength to recover after whatever it is that they think is going to occur. So there are several other parts of this which also fit, and one of the reasons why this is an important presentation to make personally is my own personal thoughts, because up until now I've been following a lot of the well-founded research on these sorts of agendas. We've had our own sources of information over the last 3 years. But I've always had questions in my mind, like, why would they do this? You know, war against China, why? Third World War, why? And suddenly, a lot of these things start to make a little bit more sense. It's possible, for example, that when we heard from Jordan Maxwell in our interview with him, which we did at the end of last year, 2009, he described to us how he had researched a number of repeating symbols and images that had been used ever since the time of Hitler, and even long before that, about the dawn of a new day. There's something very important in Masonic and Illuminati thinking about the dawn of a new day. And here we have possibly the reason for their belief that if you think about the possibility of a cataclysm, if they think this is really going to happen, the 2012 movie that many of you will have seen, after all of the flood and all of the earthquakes and tsunamis, then you've got these big ships sailing across a calm sea with the sun streaming through the clouds, and you've got the dawn of a new day, and the implication in that movie is that now those people will be able to rebuild the new earth because those are the survivors. It's the modern day Noah's Ark. It's possible that the dawn of the new day, that it refers to that. And it even occurred to me, and I'd be interested for other researchers to offer their views on this, that the very term the New World Order that we first started to hear about 20 years ago, actually longer ago than that, but the New World might be the post-cataclysmic world. The New World, it might be the order for the New World after the cataclysm. They may be planning who will inherit the New World. It may be nothing less than this. Maybe this is what the New World Order is all about. It really is the order, the plan for the new world that they think is coming. They think this is going to happen. Now, I say again, it's very, very important to differentiate out all of this information here. I don't believe this is going to happen at all, but they might be doing something crazy to try and safeguard what they believe is their own interests. This is what we need to be aware of here.
La destrucción del mundo como lo conocemos. ¿Acaso esto es el evento que podría pasar en unos años y a estas entidades les preocupa tanto? Sabemos hoy en día que ni la NASA, ni el gobierno, ni ninguna asociación conocida públicamente sería capaz de detener a un meteorito suficientemente grande. El Big One, el gran terremoto que se podría dar en la falla de San Andrés, o la explosión del Yellowstone, el volcán gigante que también podría provocar al mismo tiempo el Big One, o a la inversa. Se sabe que una erupción del Yellowstone podría aniquilar por completo a toda la humanidad, y esto no es una suposición, es un dato al que han llegado varios expertos y cualquiera puede investigar. Al final, sin importar cuál fuera el posible escenario para un evento que terminara con el mundo como lo conocemos, esta gente lo que buscaría es ser los reyes del nuevo mundo, del mundo después de la devastación, que su descendencia sea la que domine ese mundo y que pueda ser recordada como dioses conquistadores, como los iniciadores de una nueva era. ¿Realmente eso desea esta gente asquerosa? Es imposible saberlo. Gente de mente con dinero y poder es una mala combinación, pero tampoco es algo tan fácil. Como mencioné al inicio del video, antes las cosas eran diferentes. Ha pasado el tiempo y cada vez esta gente en las sombras queda más evidenciada. Va a llegar un momento donde la gente ya no se va a tragar sus mentiras, ni sus cortinas de humo. Porque somos humanos y el ser humano no significa ser débiles o tontos. Podemos cambiar, podemos ser mejores y terminar con esta antigua y oscura élite Illuminati. Si al final todos morimos, no permitamos que este tipo de personas sean las que guíen el nuevo mundo. Y por esa forma de pensar es que nos tienen miedo y nos necesitan bajo control. Porque, aunque ellos nos vean como hormigas, saben que si la gente abre los ojos, será su fin. Todo esto suena sumamente siniestro y es desesperanzador. Pero no debe ser así. El futuro no está escrito en piedra. Hubo cosas que el individuo le dijo a Bill Ryan y no sucedieron. O sea, que ellos no tienen total control de si pasa o no. Las cosas pueden cambiar y pueden ser para bien. No llueve para siempre. Y recordemos que al final, incluso de la más oscura noche, sale el sol. Si su plan es tan antiguo como se cuenta, es obvio que no va a ser tan fácil de frustrar. Pero hay que fijarnos como a Hillary Clinton, quien también pertenece a esta élite, le costó más alcanzar el poder de la presidencia de los Estados Unidos cuando salió a la luz sus ritos satánicos y que era parte de un presunto tráfico de niños. Significa que la gente puede hacer algo, se puede rebelar y podríamos pensar que dio lo mismo porque al final ganó Trump. Pero ¿qué pasa si un día alguien del pueblo se propone y gana las elecciones? Obvio lo van a matar. Pero, ¿y si otra persona más lo hace y gana? Y lo matan. Y alguien más lo hace y jamás se detiene la gente. Y entonces se evita que ellos estén al poder. ¿Y qué va a pasar el día cuando los que comiencen a cazar sean a estas asquerosas personas? el mundo podría dar un giro de tuerca. No es imposible, y estoy seguro que hay millones de posibilidades mejores y sin menos sacrificios que lo que acabo de decir. Pero si la gente se da cuenta, va a llegar un momento donde todo termine y realmente podamos ver el sol de un nuevo día. Si te gustó el video, dale like y suscríbete. Esto fue La Zona.